Well, very good afternoon to you all. Like I said, my name is Samantha Bowers. I'm the consultant for continuing education at the State Library of Iowa here. I imagine many of you will recognize me from out and about. Today's kind of a fun one because I'm actually going to get to teach this little webinar that we've scheduled here for today. So let me share my screen. Chat, if you can't see it, please. I think you should be able to. I'm going to move this out of the way as well. We've called this webinar Community Asset Mapping for Small and Rural Libraries. So I'm seeing a lot of small towns on our list, which is always fun. Van Meter, which is here in the Des Moines area, small but growing. Garnavillo, someone help me say it right. Marengo, Ruthven, these are all small towns. And as you're going to see, Iowa, and as many of you already know, Iowa is home to so many small and rural libraries. So I have a feeling if you're on this call, there's a very good chance you're actually from a small library. So, and also then the asset mapping piece, we're going to talk more about what that means as well. Great to have you all with me today. Thank you so much. Here is our rough agenda for the day. We'll kind of give a little bit of overview. As I mentioned, we're going to talk about what I mean. Garnavillo. Thanks, June. I have gotten my live fact check. This is good. All right, so we're going to define the word assets. We're going to explain what we mean when we talk about that in this context and why they matter. We're going to start thinking about where you are going to start looking for those in your small or rural community, and then how you start mapping those. So, by way of introduction, as I already mentioned, you guys know me. I'm Sam Bowers. I am a lifelong Iowan. I grew up in the lovely little town of Sibley. And I thought it would be fun here as we get started that if I was a librarian in Sibley and was working on an asset map, I would for sure put the lovely Sibley Public Library on the asset map. It's a beautiful Carnegie building that has been made accessible over the years with an elevator and accessible entryway, has a nice meeting room upstairs for grown-ups and a lovely story time space downstairs for kids. They've even made kind of a cool teen loft, which I think is pretty great. So yeah, I would definitely put the Sibley Public Library. And if anyone from Sibley is on, I have to chime in because you know I'm a huge fan of Sibley. Oh, Catherine is here. Hi, Catherine, lovely. And one of my other favorite assets in Sibley is the community swimming pool. And Sibley, for as long as I can remember, has had a nice pool. And over the years, they've just improved and improved and improved on it. And every time I've been there, there have been busloads of kids from all over the area there using the pool. And if I'm in the town of Sibley and I'm looking around and I'm thinking, all right, so now we have a busload of kids from Worthington who come down here to use our pool. And they maybe will spend time, they'll tell their parents about it. Their parents will come back. They're going to go to the ice cream shop, which is another great asset for a smallish town. They're going to go to the grocery store. How lucky are we to still have a grocery store? Maybe they'll eat at one of our restaurants. And these are all things that help make the community feel connected and awesome, which it is. So we're going to talk a little bit more about some of those assets. Good deal. Now, I mentioned that if you were from on this call, there was a very good chance you were from a small and rural library. And the Institute of Museum and Library Services defines a small library as one that serves a population of less than 25,000 people, which, if you can do the math, is 96% of Iowa libraries. So that is a really substantial number. And so when we think about asset mapping, it feels like a lot of the examples from around the US are from sort of large areas, but I really wanted to focus in this presentation on the fact that even the about 520 public libraries in Iowa that would be considered small by those IMLS standards have great assets that in those communities that are worth celebrating and are worth sort of listing out and connecting. Now, I do want to pause before I go too much farther here to give a few acknowledgements for where I drew a lot of this material from as I prepped this. The first thing to say is that if you're a member of the Association of Rural and Small Libraries, ARSL, about a year and a half ago, I did do a version of this presentation for them as well. So if you're a member and you signed into one of their recent train events, you may have seen some of this content, and it is a bit repetitive, but I thought it was worth repeating here. The other place you might have seen this is on that last bullet point there. In 2023, we did do a version of this we did do this kind of activity for our learning circuit, which is a fall event that we do. So that was done a couple years ago now. But it's a good refresher, I think, or maybe you went to the event in 2023 and haven't had a chance to get started yet. So I hope you take this as good impetus to get going. The base material is drawn from a Web Junction curriculum called Skills for Community-Centered Libraries. If you haven't had a chance to look at those resources, I would highly recommend it. They're it's very straightforward. It's laid out very well, very easy to engage with, and it's really going to give you a lot of good background on engaging your community to improve your library services. The Institute of Museum and Library Services, or IMLS, also has a similar type of curriculum or worksheet called Community Catalyst. The last I looked, it is still available on their website, despite all the changes that they've had. So you can feel free to look through that as well. And then an absolute leader in this field right now is Dr. Audrey Barbakoff, who was with a consulting group called CoLab. And she's done just a lot of great research and ground building work to help libraries engage their communities in these positive ways. Bear with me as I take a drink here. Okay, so that was our background overview. So now, what are assets? So here's our first opportunity to chat in. So when you hear the phrase community asset, pop up that chat box for me and let me know what comes to mind. I'm going to give just a minute for some of those chats to roll in. If you set the to box to everyone, instead of just hosts and panelists, everyone will be able to see your responses. I love our first two responses right away: local clubs and parks, schools and libraries. Rachel Allensworth here. Rachel has given us basically the nouns, people, places, and things, which I like. Something that makes life better for those in the community, draws people to the community, resources you can benefit from, work collaboratively, have a good relationship with. This is very good. You guys have really, drilled in. I think you've identified a lot of strong components of the definition of a community asset, somewhere that brings everyone together. And I think this is a comment from Bobby. Catherine says familiarity. I think these are all really, really good components of the definition here. When we think about an asset, the way that I've defined it based on the different resources that I've looked at is the individuals, community organizations, and larger institutions that provide resources and services to your local community. So this really can be anything from your storytime volunteer who loves to come in and help the kids make the craft every week, to the clinic, the medical clinic you might have in town. But basically any resource or service to the local community. And so then an asset map is basically an inventory of those resources. It doesn't have to be super formal. It doesn't have to be an actual map, but basically some way of inventorying those resources, the individuals, the community organizations, the institutions, the places that make your community special, that are a benefit to your community. So I have a few samples of inventories or maps coming up here. And at the end of the webinar, you'll be able to start to build your own. But here's the first sample. This is made using PowerPoint. The thing that I like about this is it kind of, it has broken out these different categories of assets that might be in this area. Daycares are certainly something you're going to want to have on the list if you're able to have those in your community. Schools, people, faith-based organizations. I know in a lot of our small communities, I hear a lot of stories of people relying on the church basement for fundraising space, for example, or they might be able to advertise in the local church bulletin for an event, that sort of thing. So certainly noting those in a small town is going to be very helpful. What's the line about? A lot of the small towns will have a library, a bar, and a church. And if you've got two of the three, then you're really riding high. Nonprofits is something that can sometimes feel like it's meant for a bigger area, but even in our small communities, we may have a Friends of the Parks type of nonprofit or Rotary Club or Kiwanis, something like this. And then also businesses. If you do have a bar or a mechanics shop, a co-op, these sorts of things, starting to note those on your list as well. Oh, for the record, the Sibley Bakery also certainly an asset that I would add, and not just because they make amazing twists, the twist up donuts. If you're in Sibley, you got to get one of those. Here's another sample using PowerPoint. This one, they have color coded a little bit, so you can see in this green circle is labeled parks and playgrounds. And then each slide going down the side over here, each green slide represents a park or playground. This one I love because you could begin to add quite a bit of information to each of these slides. You may have a homeowner who lives near that park. You may have the contact of somebody at the school. Their different circles here in this sample represent parks and playgrounds, art and culture, schools, and the local economy. I feel like this one misses out on the individuals, which are so important in a small town, whether that is just a local leader or a local community builder. I think that's not terribly well represented in this sample, but it's a decent way to start thinking about it. And then I also love this format because it'd be such an easy pay it forward resource to your connector if they had a list of all of these different assets in your hometown, as well as contact information and why they're an asset to your town. I feel like a new library director someday would really benefit from that. This is an actual map, and I kind of like it. It's from a neighborhood in Philadelphia. So, of course, many of our small towns are not going to have quite the density that we see here for this branch library in Philadelphia. And it's a bit more to pull off technologically speaking. We're not talking about just opening up a PowerPoint and starting to drop slides in. But I also think it's really dynamic and engaging. So using a tool called Google My Maps, and I actually have instructions here. I'll put the link in the chat. I have instructions here of how you could make your own Google map. It does require a free Google account, but basically you put in your library's address and then you add layers that correspond to the different types of assets. So you might have a layer that's faith communities, and you could highlight all the churches or synagogues or mosques or whatever other type of house of worship on your map. You might have a layer that's called parks, and you could highlight all the parks on your map or businesses. So they're a great, would be a fun tool. You can also, of course, with Google, like a lot of Google things, you can turn on different sharing permissions or not. So this would be a really easy way if you had some more technologically savvy partners to invite them to add the assets that they've identified on. So a little more complicated, but I think kind of dynamic and kind of cool. Lots of customization options as well. So Again, in the chat and showing on the slide is a link for you to, with some basic instructions on how to make your own if you want. All right, my next sample here, this one I kind of like. It has 3 headings. It does identify individuals, which is they have this green color. The gray color is labeled as community organizations. So this could be things like your Kiwanis or Rotary, or another type of nonprofit. And then the orange color here for this sample map is institutions. So this could be things like daycares, schools, maybe businesses, that sort of thing. One thing I do like here is that you kind of get to see these little areas, these little arrows that maybe help us see how everything is interconnected. So the local business owner is listed here in the green individuals one, but the business itself is in this gray area. So you can begin to see how, especially in a small town, all of these assets get to be a little bit interconnected. This sample does also call out something that I haven't talked a lot about yet, but I think does probably belong on a lot of our maps as well, is police and fire departments, public works, if you've worked together with them on programming in the past, or they are another type of resource for your library. Certainly worth having our city partners reflected in our asset maps as well. This is the sample that I ended up liking the best, and we're going to come back to this one. It comes from IMLS. There are a few things I like about it. One is that it does call out the individual gifts and talents that are such a big part of our small and rural stories. The other thing that I particularly love about it is number 6, that it calls out culture and stories. And I can think of so many small towns in Iowa that have some sort of really strong cultural identity. So the classic example, my husband grew up in the town of Pella. And of course, really leaning into that Dutch heritage is a huge part of who they are and what they do. But of course, if you're in Elkhorn, this is the Danish heritage. If you're further north, it might be Norwegian or German or some other type of heritage. But I think telling that story and binding the community together in that way is a big asset, as well as looking for new stories to tell. So there could be a new growing immigrant population thanks to some new local business investment or something similar. But really leaning into the culture and stories that your community has as a way to celebrate something beneficial. Excuse me. All right. Any questions so far? I haven't seen anything, but Amanda, keep me honest if you see anything. So now that we've sort of defined what assets are, I want to ask the question, why start with assets? I know in a lot of our small towns, it can be pretty tempting to think about the things that we don't have. We don't have a daycare. We don't have a hospital. We don't have a grocery store. Our last restaurant just closed, for example. And especially when we want to compare to other towns around us. Oh, that town has a coffee shop. If only we had a coffee shop. And sometimes we think about this with strategic planning. You may have gone through a planning process and came across this idea of SWOT, or strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And so as we're planning, and in our small towns, it can be very tempting to lean into the weaknesses and threats. What's wrong with the community? What needs to be fixed? And as a library, we often want to be in fix-it mode. We want to be in help mode, which is definitely not bad. There's no grocery store, there's no childcare, there's a lack of affordable housing. It gets to feel very negative. It's also hard to imagine when you're doing your library strategic plan to think through how would the library is probably never going to take the place of a grocery store, a childcare center, or a housing provider. Some days it might feel like you're doing those things, but the library is never going to be a full replacement for a well-functioning state licensed daycare. We tend to focus on the lack of resources. So with asset-based community development, or a focus more on the assets that we have, we want to focus a little bit more on the strengths and success that are already going in that community. So this is from DePaul University. They have a whole toolkit related to asset-based community development. Basically, we want to build on the good things that are already found in the community. Individuals, associations, institutions, all those different categories of things that I kind of laid out in our first time together here. And we want to build on that, not concentrate necessarily on the needs or the deficits. We want to celebrate what's already going and name and celebrate the gifts that are already present to create change. We're working sort of with the community and what their passions and gifts are to create change. Because asset-based community development has three sort of principles. One is that everyone has gifts and that everyone has something to contribute and that everyone has a motivation to act. And so when we can identify those strengths and those motivations, we can really engage a lot of citizens to step up and make change. So it might not mean bringing back a daycare center, but it might mean thinking creatively based on the gifts that people have and the skills and the capacity that people have to come up with a creative solution for that town. We often find in our small and rural towns that there is a lack of the institutions. So your business or your institution list of assets in your small town could be quite small. But I think that your list of engaged individuals with gifts that you've identified could be larger than a bigger area, simply because you are better connected and know more people. There's a sense of community and a focus on individuals, and that really is a great way to celebrate what it means to live and work in our small towns. The asset-based approach also sort of says, what do we have going already for us to meet our own needs or problems, rather than waiting on a big institution to come in and drive change, which sometimes is needed. But when you can start in this community-centered way, there's so much more buy-in around the community for change, which can be hard in a small town as well. So everyone has an opportunity to use their gifts and skills and talents to make the community a better place. So I think it feels pretty natural to say, like, well, let's start from what we already have going for us. But then the next piece is that you need someone to sort of facilitate that conversation, create those connection points between individuals and institutions and places of business, to be that connector, to be the connector between all the different players on the map or in the inventory. So starting with the library as that connector can make a lot of sense. So the Asset-Based Community Development Institute, oh, sorry, North Liberty's name got cut off on this slide here, but they've defined what qualities a connector should have. They should be gift-centered. They want to engage the best in everyone. They should be well-connected, including in their facilities, which might mean they've got an accessible facility, a facility that can be shared and used. They should be trusted within the community. This is another reason why an outside agency walking into a small town is not going to have the same buy-in if they try to do this type of process as somebody who's already on the ground and working. And they also have to believe the best of the community, believe that the community is welcoming and ready for this sort of work. And so I kind of think this to me feels like almost every Iowa library that I know. Already, I feel like libraries celebrate the gifts of the people in the community through things like programming collaboration or volunteer programs, Friends of the Library. Certainly well connected. They are often in highly visible places in town, maybe even close to other city facilities, usually very accessible. They tend to be trusted. Of course, this is not going to be the case in every town, but mostly I think people love their libraries and love their librarians. There could be some work that needs to be done with some specific individuals or with some stakeholders, but in general, libraries are trusted places across the US. And I also know that libraries welcome everyone in the community. And in general, people feel welcome in their libraries. The other thing I think that makes libraries well qualified to be a connector when we talk about building an asset map is that already you probably have some type of community-focused strategic plan. You've probably already started to look at ways that you can engage different assets in different capacities, whether that is the Parks Department as a programming support or other things like Rotary or Kiwanis for fundraising. So you're already have looked at the community and started to build some of those bridges, and you're very visible in the city. So I'm going to go back to chat here. Do you think that your library would be a good map maker and connector for your community? I'll have a little sip of water while we wait for some responses, if you can get those in the chat. Maybe this is kind of too big of a question, but would love to hear some basic thoughts. I know after we did our learning circuit on this topic a few years ago, it was exciting to see some libraries that started to do some of this work, or maybe realize like, oh, I've kind of already been doing that, but maybe if I formalize it or get it a little bit better documented, we'll have, a better resource at our hands. So I have a question in the chat. What do connectors do? So basically the connector is the person who's going to start to make this inventory, make this map of assets to begin to say in our small town, sure, we may have some, let's see, weaknesses or threats coming at us, but we also have all of these good things going for us. So how they connect to, how they fit into the asset mapping is that they have started to make this inventory and can begin to facilitate some of the conversations with the various stakeholders around town or around the area to say, what can we do to celebrate and build on the strengths that we have? And does that begin to help us meet any of the needs that we also have maybe identified? I see a comment here about a library being in the local community center. That's a great way to start drawing connections for folks. Also houses a senior center, definitely. People come to us from information. Last summer after the flooding, we were a major community information hub. That's great. Often libraries are a good, a place for someone to stop that needs more information on a local service. So maybe I'm new to town and have to figure out where I pay for something or what kind of resource I might need to find. Maybe I'm a transient individual that needs help with a social service. Libraries are great connectors for that. Centrally located between schools and downtown. We have a comment here as a new library director, feeling like an outsider for a while. And I think that's fair. But I also think that starting to build a map like this, and as we get into some of the practicalities of building a map, it's a great way to introduce yourself to the community and become to be better known even when you're new in town. We have another comment mentioning reconnecting with long neglected residents. Absolutely. I think oftentimes this is a great way to draw people into the library who maybe haven't been familiar with library services or different things that the library can do, and this is a great way to engage folks. Staff wants to be helpful. There's a lack of documentation and initiative. And I think that's another great way to sort of say, let's dedicate some time, some staff time, some energy to a project like this and dedicate time to following up on it. We're going to talk about how this is not a static document. This is a living document. And drive collaboration a little more. Yes. I appreciate what Chris is saying. Community assets fail to work together consistently, and I think that can be a risk. So hopefully with a dedicated inventory of some sort, we can start to solve some of those issues. All right, so let's go through this sample again. Just kind of running through some of the examples. And if you have a Word doc up maybe, or a piece of paper in front of you, maybe you want to start to jot down what some of these things might be in your town. You can also maybe use the chat if you'd like. But with our individuals, we are thinking of their gifts and talents and skills, their dreams and hopes. Well, everyone has dreams and hopes and fears and motivations. So I think of folks who might be willing to teach a class or do a program. I think of people who are leaders in their individual communities. Maybe that is a local pastor or a local business owner. It could be a book club leader, some other sort of school advocate, president of a PTA, maybe a bus driver that all the kids know and love. I also think that you and your staff go on this list. You are people who are plugged in and involved and engaged in the community. This could be city council people or city staff as well, who have some sort of skill or talent and who are motivated. When we think about associations, this is a voluntary group of people. So this could be a quilting group or a book club or a Bible study of some sort. This could also be something like Kiwanis or your local friends group, perhaps, if you have one. And just because you might not have a connection to that group doesn't mean they are not going to go on this map right now. So even if there's been perhaps hostility towards the library in the past, which I hope there hasn't been, but I would still want to include them on this list because they are active in the community. And with the right bridge building, you may be able to help connect them to someone else, even if it isn't the library. But starting to note those associations, what they do, what they've talked about doing but haven't done yet, whether or not you have a connection to them. The next category on this list is institutions, which they've defined as organizations of paid staff. So this would be, they might have a physical space that is an asset to the community in some way, or equipment. They might, employ people in town, which is certainly a benefit to the town, to the area. I'm thinking here of schools, if you have them, colleges, hospital, childcare center. They make money and they pay staff, unlike, say, a association, which is usually voluntary and unpaid, but they're not necessarily a business here. So your library would go on this list as well as an institution. The next category of asset listed here is physical spaces, which is another one I love when we think about asset mapping for small and rural communities. Almost every town has a park of some sort. Sometimes it's nice, sometimes it's not nice, but it does exist. Parks are something I would also put on Sibley's asset map to keep using my hometown as an example. It could be a walking path, a lake, a pond, some sort of green space. This could be other types of places where activities happen, like a community center or a senior center, a rec area, that sort of thing. But definitely worth noting out some of these physical assets. And I think noting either here or in the individual's area, if you have a person who's a point of contact for that particular space. So maybe there's a baseball field behind the school. Jackie mentions a historical society. Absolutely, they probably have a lead volunteer, or maybe they have some sort of paid staff, but noting who, if there's a name associated with that place, would be helpful. Economy and exchange. This would be businesses. They could be formal, like a grocery store or a pharmacy, or informal, like a farmer's market or a vendor fair type of activity. Maybe there's a Christmas market or Sibley has the good old summertime event. There could be some sort of market associated with an event like that. Formal or informal places of exchange, barter, or business. Again, perhaps could be a very small number in your small town, but I think as you start thinking about it a little more broadly, you may find more than you think. And then, as I mentioned, this is one of my favorite pieces here, is that we celebrate through this map the culture and stories of our residents, whether that is some overarching town narrative, founded by half a dozen Danish families that came to the area in the 1890s, or maybe a little bit more of a micro story to say, hey, I'm new in town, or we're a group of families who are new in town, and this is a little bit about us. So we recognize and value everyone in our town through these local cultures and stories. One of my favorite Northwest Iowa ones is the Moose Days. We celebrate that time a moose walked through our town 120 years ago. And has it grown into something bigger than mooses? It absolutely has, but it's kind of started with that local heritage and tradition and has become part of the identity of that little town. So as the story grows and changes, these cultures and stories grow and change, but it is definitely an asset to a small town to be thinking, what binds us together? What from our background sort of is the glue of this, and how do we continue to celebrate that as people come and go, and as things change or don't change? So I want to take some time here to just mention a few things. Having talked for a long time already, it feels like. Asset mapping is a way to take things that are maybe a little bit less tangible, a little bit less visible, and make them front and center as a way to celebrate, to say we have, we can talk about all the things we don't have, but we do have all of these really good things as well. So the first bullet point that says, gain clarity about what was previously invisible. So a way to highlight the good things a small community has going for it. And it should also be a community-driven process. The library might jumpstart this conversation with some other partners, but it's not meant to start and stop with the library. It's really meant to be driven by the community itself. And as the third bullet point there says, owned by the residents. So this doesn't stop with the library, but as this initiative is carried out in your town, that a number of different groups and people feel some of that buy-in and some of that connection. And I think that's where, when we start to think through some of the comments that came through chat of lacking documentation and initiative, or feeling like people fail to work together consistently, the more people you can have bought into the asset mapping process, the less chance you have of this just sitting on a shelf somewhere to be dusted off and recycled in a few years. I think also to this fourth bullet point here, libraries really are great places to empower and engage the community. And as librarians, you're so often places of citizen dialogue. As libraries, we're often places of dialogue for our citizens. And this is another way to build that civic engagement. And then, as I think you can also probably intuit from our conversation over the last hour here, is that this is not meant to be a one and done. People are going to come and go, businesses are going to open and close, parks are going to become assets or drains. And so you want to be consistently reviewing this document with different stakeholders, with different community groups, and continuing to build and change it. So to that point, it is not a static list. And it's not meant to be done only by some sort of giant agency. As I've said, this is meant to be done with community members, not just by outside agencies or professionals. It's also not just a list of institutional assets. If you stop at the businesses and institutions and groups in your town, I think you're going to feel like your map is pretty small, especially in a smaller rural area. But when you broaden out to think about the individuals, the stories, the physical places, I think you'll start to see a lot more sense and a lot more use come from a document like this. And as I've said before, the last bullet point says it's not a complete and final picture of what's useful. I hope that this process is frequently growing and changing for you. So, how to start the process? Like I said, I think it probably does make some sense to start internally with your staff, with your board, with your friends group or another set of library related stakeholders, and start to put people, places, and things on the map. The next piece rolls into current library partners. So you might take this list over to the extension office or to the Rotary Club or to another individual and say that you've worked with in the past, to say, all right, who else should be on this list? And that's going to be a question we're always asking. I also think there would be a time and place here to do a community listening session to say, you know, we want to start thinking about the cool things in our town. Come tell us about what you're doing. Come tell us about things we might not know yet, and you'll learn something new. And then always asking this question, who else should I talk to about this list? They may have ideas that you haven't thought of. So I do have a Google Doc that can be downloaded as a Word doc or a PDF that you can download at that link. I put the link in chat, or you can type it in based on what you see on the slide. But let me click on this here for us. I'll just kind of show you this. Basically, just a way for you to start to fill out your asset map, your inventory list. I think you might be surprised at what you're able to fill in. And then if you follow this process of continuing to check in with different partners, asking your community, the list will grow and grow. And again, a process of continuous review. So my last question, who is on your list to help you complete your asset map? And then also curious if folks have some initial ideas of making sure that the process is engaging for the community rather than just something that's done for the community. Yes, and while you guys are thinking on that, we had a question come through. Will the slides be available? Yes, I will throw them into Workday. You can download them from there. It's probably going to be our best bet. Make a note to do that right now so I don't forget. Asset mapping. I love the idea of working with the Chamber of Commerce. Christy mentions that because they're also probably already keeping a list of some of these types of places. They may also know about new businesses that might be up and coming. So that would be potentially a great partner if you have one in your town. The staff at City Hall, absolutely. I think this is another opportunity to maybe do some education with some of our city partners. Say, hey, the library has really been thinking we wanted to sort of make this list of people, places, things we know we can rely on in our town. I've got a list started. People at the city are better connected than I am. I wonder if I might take some time to pick your brain a little bit, explain what we're up to, and see what you can add. I think it could be a great bridge building opportunity between the library and the city as well. Yes, certainly talking to your own board is going to be another great place to start. Because there are people who are on the board because they're well connected and they're passionate about improving at least library services in your town as well. The asset map could be a good resource for people who want to do something in town, who has an idea and wants to make it happen. Who should they talk to? The asset map would give them some ways to start. How else can the map be used? I think that is a great example, Elizabeth, to say, hey, I wanted to open a nonprofit that does X, Y, or Z. Okay, let's have a think about who else is interested in that topic and kind of go from there. Making those connections is a great way for the map to be used for sure. Other ideas of how you might use a map like this is the last part of that question. So if you have ideas of what you might do once you have your map all the way developed, you can throw those into chat as well now. Let's see, another example of helping you complete the asset map. Funding bodies. I found out about a cool program that's been going on for a couple of years by attending an awards ceremony for our local community grant. Absolutely. I think that's fabulous. Even if you're not up for the grant, to go and hear what people are up to, what do they want money to do, and then also how can the library partner with them potentially? How could you connect them to other community partners? Leadership class groups, area economic development associations, also all great ways to get some assets added to your map. I want to make a quick comment on the concept of using the map for building library partnerships. I think that is potentially a really great use of this to say, hey, you've got this group that's going to start meeting, but you don't have space. Do you want to use the library's meeting room space or, some other way that you might be able to help a local asset, or a local asset might be able to help you? But I also want to keep in mind that ultimately, I think a tool like this could be bigger than the library as well, that it's not just about, oh, could you do a program for us? Could we do a program for you, etc. It's also about trying to connect people who may not know about each other yet, and build on what your town has going for it, whether or not that involves the library directly. All right, we have 10 minutes left. I'll pop my contact information up one more time. Wow, how did I manage that? Here we go. And I will open it up to any general questions that you all might have. Yes, there's a comment in the chat about approaching partners who are not thinking about reaching out into the community. And I think when you have a firmer list like this and you can say, hey, did you know that you are both you're you're both working on this issue? Might be helpful if you work together. You might get more done. And of course, you can't you can lead a horse to water. You can lead an asset to water, but you can't make it collaborate. But helping people see that there's, a lot of good work going on in your town is, I think, a huge benefit of this kind of map. Would you classify law offices as financial planners as an institution or economy and exchange? Ooh, an interesting question. Might depend on the kind of work that they are doing. I would probably put them into economy and exchange, or particularly financial planners. Law offices, maybe institutions. Interesting question. Other questions or concerns as we wrap up our time together today? Give it just another moment here. All right. All right. I feel like networking events would be central to create a living asset map. How much attention is paid to hosting regular networking events in the asset mapping literature? This is not something that I have seen a ton of, but I also think it may depend on the size of the community that you're in. So for example, in a large community, it might not be possible or feasible to gather people together very often, but in a small town, it might be really relevant to say, here's a quarterly meeting at the library. You're invited. Come on down. I think it's a great way to introduce new pieces of your map over time to appeal it to assets that have maybe been on the map for longer. So you've got a new family in town who's really passionate about something, maybe having a standing event at the library to connect them to other nonprofits or clubs or businesses in the area, might not be a bad idea at all. I think a lot of it you'll find, especially in a small town, is going to have a pretty informal vibe to it. To say, oh, you're starting that kind of initiative. Do you know about this or that? And facilitating those connections might not be quite as formal as a networking event, but it could be. And I think it might depend on what works best for your community. And it could vary based on time as well. We do this in the summer when there are more people in town. In the winter, we skip it. Or maybe we're in a season of growth. We have a few more structured events. And in a slower season, we sort of take it easier back off from those. But I don't know that a structured event is always going to be the answer, but I think it could be worth a shot. All right, folks. Well, thank you very much for joining me this afternoon. I hope that you find something here you can use. The slides will be in Workday. You can download the links to the template as well as the creating your own Google map if you want. Hope you find it helpful, and best